Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today to go over several of the new features now available in Cisco Unified Communications Manager version 10. My name is Jamie and I'll be your host, and John Meersma will be the presenter today. John has over 13 years of experience with Cisco technology as a professional instructor, administrator, and as a consultant. He's been teaching at Sunset Learning for the past 8 years and specializes in Cisco Unified Communications technology and curriculum. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Sunset Learning, we're a Cisco Learning partner and have been delivering and developing authorized training for almost 20 years. We have over 40 locations across North America, and all of our training dates are guaranteed to run. We recently developed several unique collaboration training offerings, including a 2-day CUCM 10.5 upgrade class, a 5-day advanced administration class for CUCM, a Jabber deployment class, and many more. Please feel free to reach out to us for more information or any questions. You can find full course outlines and training dates available on our website at sunsetlearning.com. If you're looking for additional training resources from our instructors, you should check out our blog page. It's filled with articles, blogs, videos, and other resources we hope you find helpful. Also, I encourage you to follow us on social media for training and industry updates. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to John.
Hello and welcome. In this presentation, we're going to look at some new features that are available in Cisco Unified Communications Manager version 10. My name is John Meersma, and I'm an instructor with Sunset Learning. Now, there are a lot of new features available. This presentation, I'm going to give you a demonstration of 4 of those features. However, I've made a list of about a dozen of my favorite. So let's talk about some of these new options that are available. Starting with local route group enhancement. Now I'm going to show you this later on in the demonstration. What this does is this allows administrators to simplify the dial plan. If you have many sites, multiple sites with multiple gateways at each site, it can get pretty complex trying to determine if this number's dialed, use this gateway, and then you have to replicate that for each site. So this feature is going to simplify the dial plan for multiple locations. Self-provisioning for end user phones. This is also something I'm going to demonstrate. This feature allows users to plug a phone in, potentially have it auto-register, and then dial a pre-configured extension. They'll be prompted to enter their extension. You could set a password. Once the user enters their extension, the phone will reset, and now that phone will be configured to belong to the end user. Now, Cisco has this capability already in prior versions, except that you need to use the taps feature, and you would also have to have a separate server, a contact center express server. With version 10, those things are no longer needed. We can let users provision their phones without any additional devices. The next feature will be urgent priority for directory numbers. This is used for global dial plans. And by global dial plans, I mean plus dialing. If you see plus and then the 10-digit extension, or even longer, typically the global dial plan format is plus, country code, outside number. Well, if you're using that dial plan, you probably have multiple translation patterns and transformation masks. And so it can get really complex. If a user is simply trying to call another internal user from IP phone to IP phone, we don't need to go through multiple translations. We don't need to use transformation rules. We just simply want to call the other extension. This feature allows you to check urgent priority on the directory number. And it simply means if this extension is dialed or this number is dialed, with or without the plus, just ring the phone. Do not go through translations, transformations, and try to figure out where this number goes and how to treat it. It's simply an internal extension, and we want to ring the phone immediately. The next feature will be network-based call recording. This is something I'm also going to demonstrate. And what this allows is the gateway, a Cisco ISR2 router, which will be a 2900 or a 3900. An ISR2 router can be the source for recording calls. Imagine we have a call agent who's working from home, and that agent may not even have an IP phone. It's very possible they just have a traditional telephony phone. So when a customer calls, it will come into the company, the gateway router receives the PSTN call, forwards the signal to Unified Communications Manager, who then forwards the call back out of the gateway to the user's home. The call agent picks up the call, and their phone, being a traditional telephony phone, is not capable of sending an IP stream to the server that's going to record the call. It doesn't have that capability at all. We need some way to record that. So what version 10 allows is the gateway. The initial gateway that receives the call will fork it. It will send a signal to Communications Manager, which could then lead back out to the PSTN, to the call agent's house, and at the same time it will fork and send an IP stream to a Cisco MediaSense server. That's the server I'm using in this example to record the call. Another example of why you'd want the gateway to be the source would be using Jabber. Very similar to the first scenario, a call comes into the company and the user's IP phone, their desk phone, is set to forward to up to multiple destinations. One of them could be their Jabber device. So the user can take the call on their Apple, Android, their tablet, their computer. Any of these devices support Jabber. Well, when they take the call on their Jabber device, if you want to record it, we need some mechanism to fork that call. And the Jabber devices are not capable of that. The gateway that received the initial call is. So I'll show you how to set that feature up. Translation pattern can now use Originator's calling search space. This is another feature that simplifies the dial plan. The previous versions required, for instance, let's say a call comes in from the outside world. It comes in through the gateway. The gateway would need a calling search space. It needs permission to forward the call internally. Remember, every possible destination, every number that can be dialed inside of a Unified Communications Manager database, every destination number will have a partition. So the source needs permission. In this example, the source is the gateway. Call comes in, and the gateway would need permission to send it to a translation pattern. The translation pattern could take the 10-digit number, which is what the initial caller dialed. The translation pattern will then trim that down to 4 digits, which is what's being used on the internal extension. The translation pattern now owns the call. It becomes the source. So therefore, it needs a calling search space, a separate set of permissions, to be able to continue forwarding the call to the end user phone. So that's 2 sets of permissions, 2 calling search spaces. One for the originating gateway, the second for the translation pattern. This feature allows us to tell the translation pattern, hey, just use the original calling search space. So if our gateway has the proper permissions, we can use its calling search space, and that's the only one we need. Just one set of permissions, and it will be maintained throughout the entire call. Audit Log Viewer is a feature that allows you to see in real time or historical records who's logged into your servers, from which IP address, and what exactly are they doing or have they done. You use real-time monitoring tool, RTMT to examine the audit log viewer. So you can use RTMT and you can see exactly what's going on currently, or you can view historical records. Keeps track of what's happened. The self-care portal is it's an improvement to the end user web page. If you give your end users permission to log into Unified Communications Manager and manage their own phone, maybe they could set their call forwarding or their single number reach. They can populate their directory, set their speed dials. The self-care portal is an easy to use web interface that simplifies the process of managing the phone for the end user. If you've used version 10 Unified Communications Manager or any other Cisco server platform, then you know that it must be installed within a VM environment. Installing Unified Communications Manager on a physical server is no longer supported, so now we have to use a virtual environment. And because of that, Cisco has eased or simplified renaming and changing the IP address. You now can use command line interface. One command will allow you to change both hostname and IP address. Another new feature is configurable RTP and secure RTP, real-time protocol, port ranges. So now you can choose exactly which range of ports will be used for audio and video calls. Configurable set of non-preemptive numbers. These can be used for emergency calls. And what it does is it allows you to configure certain numbers that cannot be preempted. Another caller with a higher priority is not able to supersede you. So certain numbers can be set aside, and you can be sure that nobody is going to come along and kick you off the phone. Video on hold is located under the Media Resource tab, and this allows you to send video if the end user device supports it. So when a customer calls in and maybe the call agent's busy, so you put the caller on hold, video on hold feature can now go to a MediaSense server, which again is Cisco's server platform that stores media files, audio recordings or video streams. And that MediaSense server can stream a video for the customer that's on hold. So these are some of the new features that are available in Unified Communications Manager 10. And what I'd like to do is demonstrate some of them. I'm going to start with self-provisioning. And the self-provisioning feature is going to allow end users to plug in their phone, dial an extension, and then the phone will reset, and then that phone will belong to that end user. So in this example, I'm logging into Unified Communications Manager 5.1 or 10.5.1, and I want to show you that there are no end users in the database, and there are no phones. So what I'd like to do is fix that. So the first thing I'm going to do to demonstrate self-provisioning is create a line template. This is actually a new feature in version 10, the universal line template. And it allows me to set parameters that are going to be used for directory numbers. So you could create a template for basically anything. Types of users, maybe you have a template for interns or management, or maybe even location. Denver users might have a specific template. So I'm going to create the universal line template, and I'm just going to add a simple description of first name, last name. Nearly every setting that's available on a line can be configured within the line template page. So you have a lot of capability in here. directory numbers, music on hold, call forwarding. I'm just going to create a basic template and just give it a name, self pro line. And the reason I'm creating these line templates and even device templates is I'm going to need them in order, a little bit later on, I'm going to need them within my profiles. So here I'm going to create a device template. Same concept, just settings that can be configured for phones. And then I will be able to attach both the device template and the line template to my user profile. It takes a moment to load the page. I'll give the template a name of self-pro device. And these are required settings here, not the description, but everything else is going to be required. So I'll give a description of first name, last name, set the device pool for Denver. I'll use the security template, standard SIP profile. Even if I'm not using a SIP phone, I still need to create the SIP profile in case this is applied to a SIP phone or a Jabber device. Phone button template. So these are the required settings, but notice they have a wide variety, an enormous amount of settings that are available. If you did not want to create a line template, you could modify the line settings under the device. And then we have first name, last name, user, email, department, manager. These are all macros that can be placed. And then when the user logs in or uses this template, their information will populate these macro settings. Okay, so I've created a line template and a device template. And so what we're going to do now is create a user profile. Let me make sure I save that. Okay. So under, pardon me, user settings, user profile. And it's this profile which will allow me to specify that whoever uses or is associated with this profile will be able to provision their own phones. So it's the user profile that gives me that attachment. Here I'm going to connect a device template for phones. If I had mobile phones or remote profiles, they could all have their own device template. And I need a universal line template. So that's why I created those initially. And then here, users that get this profile will be able to provision up to 10 phones. Now I'm going to create a feature group template. And this is going to be used when pulling users in via LDAP. I'm going to use Microsoft Lightweight Directory Authentication Protocol. I'm going to use LDAP to pull users in from an existing Microsoft database. If you have a .com, a .gov, a .edu, then most likely you have an LDAP database. And so if your users exist in that database, we can sync, we can pull those users right into Cisco servers. And then when I do that, I want to use this feature group template, and it's going to give me some extra functionality that I'll show you. Okay, the feature group template, you could set present settings. What I'm interested in setting here is the user profile. So whoever gets this feature group template will get the self-provisioning profile that I just created. Okay, so that was successfully saved. Now I'm going to go to LDAP, make sure that I've enabled synchronization, and I want to either create or modify or examine my LDAP configuration. So here is the Microsoft username, the password for the Microsoft administrator. This is the search base. Where in the Microsoft domain are our users located? And they're in the organizational unit called pod1 in the sli-uclabs.com domain. This information tells me what features or what fields will be synchronized. If they're populated in Microsoft, they'll be pulled over. And this is where I can now set the feature group template. This is a new feature in version 10, as is access control groups. So as I synchronize users from the LDAP database, I can also specify which group to put the user in. So that can save you some configuration steps. Users will be put into the standard CUCM end users group, and they'll get the feature group template, which will give them the user profile, which will allow them self-provisioning. And we can now, as long as we have a line template inside of this feature group template, if we have a line template, we can assign extensions. So when the users come in from LDAP, I can say give them a extension within this pool. This is the IP address of the LDAP server. And notice no errors. That means it's ready to go. It was able, my credentials, the IP address, and the path all checked out. Perform a full sync, should bring in end users. We'll give that a few minutes. Now I need to get some phones added. Before I add the phones, there's another step that I need to take care of, and I need to create a CTI route point, and that's going to allow me, this is basically a virtual phone. It'll have an extension assigned to it, and it's that extension which we'll use to dial self-provisioning. So it's basically the IVR number, and we'll associate that to this route point. And just give it the device pool. Now that I've saved it, I can add the directory number, and this will be the number that users dial to activate or to reach the self-provisioning process. Okay. Now I need to have an application user that is associated with the CTI route point that I just created. So I would create a new application user for credential purposes. Remember, application users are not interactive. They do not log in via the web page. They're used for credentials for the system. Self-provisioning is going to use this user's credentials, username, password. This user must have the CTI route point as a controlled device. And the user must be a member of the standard CTI enabled group. Once I have that in place, I can now populate the self-provisioning feature. So here we can choose what authentication or no authentication will be required. I'm going to link the CTI route point that I created as well as the application user. Save and restart now. So we've created the templates, the feature group template, the user profile. We've added them to the LDAP configuration. I've synchronized to pull new users in. The users will be given permission to use this self-provisioning service. The CTI route point has an extension, and it's that extension users will dial. Finally, the application user has the permission to run this process. Now we need to get some phones into the database. So I'm going to use auto registration. Notice it's disabled by default. So if I specify a device template, a line template, and then create a range of numbers that will be used for phone extensions, save and apply. So now phones will be allowed to auto register to this server. They will be given a random number of 1,000 through 2,000. End users are now in the system, and they will be able to go to one of these phones and provision it to be their phone. Let's go see how our users are doing. And we'll then go check on the phones. So now we have 4 users that came from LDAP. If we go take a look at Andre Green, you'll see that the telephone number that was configured in Microsoft comes over. And the self-service user ID, remember I said in LDAP synchronization, I said that users will get a phone number from 4,000 to 4,010. So Andre has an extension of 4002. It's his self-service ID for self-provisioning, and it's also going to be set as his primary extension. Notice the user profile is the self-provisioning profile that I created. Andre's primary extension is 4002. And Andre is a member of the end users group. All of that was configured within the LDAP setting. So let me set up. You might hear a few beeps. We'll see if we can get this phone to allow to auto register. And let me make sure my settings are correct. That is the IP address of the server we're using. Okay. So we'll let that phone auto register. I see I have some desktop phones that are registered already. So I have 2 desktop phones that are ready to go. I could, from either one of those phones, I could dial 4357 to start the self-provisioning process. And we'll give this phone a few more seconds. Doesn't look like it's wanting to do a whole lot. Maybe I'll restart it. We're not using emergency responder, so that's a normal warning. Looks like now it wants to come in and register. So the phone will auto register and it'll get a random extension within the 1000 block. Looks like it'll be 1002. And then I'll dial the self-provisioning number, and this phone should then belong to Andre.
To provision this device, enter your self-provisioning identification number followed by the pound key. You have entered 4002. Press the pound key to confirm. This device will now restart with a new extension. Goodbye.
So that's successful, and the phone will reload, and it will now belong to Andre. And if we go to the device phone settings and we take a look at phones, and let's just go start fresh. We see that the Cisco IP communicator, the soft phone that I was just using, now belongs to Andre Green. And the settings, the description, the line, the caller ID, that will all have Andre's name in it because that's what I set up using the device and the line template. The alerting name, and scroll down, the caller ID. Caller ID is Andre Green. This is when Andre calls you. When Andre calls you, this is what you will see on your phone. If you were to pick up your phone and dial Andre, if you were to dial 4002, you would see what's in the alerting name. You would see this. So this is the alerting name is what gets sent back to the original caller. And the caller ID is what you see when Andre calls you. Okay, so that is the self-provisioning feature that's new to version 10. The next thing I'm going to demonstrate is the recording, the gateway source for recording. So what I have is a MediaSense server and it's this server that's going to store files. It will store the audio files. It can store the video files that can be used for video on hold. So it's this server that we're going to send a copy of our calls to. So to get started with call recording, I need to have a trunk. I need to have a few trunks. These trunks must be SIP. So I have a SIP trunk to the PSTN. So I have a Cisco router, an ISR2 2900, which is this router here. So this router is connected to the PSTN, to 2900. Notice it has the software 15.33 mtrain. That release is required in order to support the gateway being the source for call recording. You need this version or newer of an iOS. So this is what is connected to the public switch telephone network. And I'm telling Unified Communications Manager to speak SIP to it. And so if I scroll down, I can see that I have the IP address of the gateway. I'm just using standard SIP security profile and standard SIP profile. Since the gateway can be the source for call recording, that's what I'm going to tick this box here that says this trunk connects to a recording enabled gateway. And this will allow Unified Communications Manager to understand that any call coming from this gateway or going to this gateway can be forked to the MediaSense server. How do we know about the MediaSense server? We have a second SIP trunk which connects to the MediaSense server. And again, this is just a standard SIP trunk, standard security profile, standard SIP profile, and as long as it's going to the correct IP address, it'll be used for call recording. Once we have the trunk set up and we've enabled the trunk to the gateway that will be used for the source of the call recording, and we've ticked use this gateway as the source, once we have that configured, I'm going to make a remote or a recording profile. And this is going to simply contain the route pattern. So when Unified Communications Manager needs to call the SIP MediaSense server to set up a connection between it and the gateway, it'll dial this extension. And so this will be put into the profile, and then I'm going to go make a route pattern with that extension. So I have no route patterns yet, so I'm going to make a route pattern to 7777. I'm going to point it to the media sent server. And that's all that's required there. So we can see in the route plan report, we can see that if an end user dials that extension, or excuse me, Unified Communications Manager will dial this extension, it will be sent to the MediaSense server, which will be used for call recording. I've created a recording profile, and now I need to associate that to the phone. So I would pick one of these phones which will be used. Perhaps Andre Green is the agent. His phone can be used as the call agent, and we want to record his calls. So on the directory number page, I'm going to scroll down and configure the recording options. Here it's disabled by default. I'm going to choose automatic call recording. You also have the option of selective. If you choose selective, then you need to give the user, the phone, a soft key template so that when the user needs to initiate recording, he'll have that feature available to him on his phone via the soft key. In this example, we want the gateway to be the source, and I'm going to automatically record all calls. The recording profile that I made is going to be attached, and I have a choice of gateway or phone preferred. Now, just because I select gateway preferred, the phone can be the source. If the user takes the call and you want the phone itself to be the source, that's fine. You just need to enable the built-in bridge on the phone, and then the phone will fork the RTP media stream, one to itself, the agent, and the other one to the MediaSense server. Here we're going to let the gateway do it. I will not turn on the built-in bridge, so the phone will not be able to be the source. Once that's done, now I need to tell the gateway that it needs to register. It needs to register its extended media function, and so I've actually got a list of commands that I'm going to be using. So if you want to see the commands, I'll type them up into a text file, and then you can take a screenshot. Personally, I like to use text files when putting in router commands. Then I can just paste them in. All right, Unified Communication, WS API, and then I need to, the exclamation points are spaces, so that when I paste this in, it will it'll tell the router that there's more lines below and to keep going. All right, and then specify the URL of this is going to be the IP address, the path to the Unified Communication Server. And the IP address of your server, colon, port number that'll be used, 8090, slash UCM underscore extended media function. And then before I do that, I actually want to show registration just to see if just to see if anything is currently registered to the gateway, and it should not be. So no extended media function registered currently, and that's what these commands will take care of. And then I can go back and look for the registration, show registration. Here we see that the gateway has now registered to Unified Communications Manager. And I want to take some of these commands out so you can see everything that I did. And you can take a screenshot if you'd like. I also I want to show you the HTTP commands that are required as well. You need to be an HTTP client. I need to set the connection idle. And I also need to be an HTTP server. All right, so these are the commands that are going to be required to configure the gateway to register to your Unified Communications Manager. Once it's registered, it will then, when that phone with the recording profile sends or receives a call, that phone or the gateway that the call goes through will fork the call and send a copy to the media sent server. You'll know that's working by using the show call media forking command, and that will show you during the call that the gateway is sending a copy to the media sent server. The phones themselves can be notified that they're being recorded by setting service parameter, Unified Communications Manager, or choose your server, and then the call manager service. Now here I want to hunt, I could hunt for the call recording option, or I could use Control F and just type in call recording, and I should find it, and it takes me right to that spot. And here I've set the features to true, but the defaults are false. The recording notification for the observed target, this is the agent, and this will play a beep because it's set to true. The connected party is the customer. And again, if you need to set beeps to notify both agents and customer, then you would do so here under service parameters. If you want information on any of these, you can simply click the link and it'll give us the definition and the explanation. All right, so that is using the gateway as the call recording source. There's another feature that I want to show you, and this one is going to be using multiple local route groups. This is to simplify the dial plan. So imagine for this demonstration that we have two sites. We have two locations, one in Denver and one in Dallas. So I have two device pools. All phones that are going to live in Denver will get the Denver device pool. All phones that live in Dallas will get the Dallas device pool. Both locations are going to have two gateways each, one for traditional calls and one for emergency calls. So I'm going to quickly create 4 gateways, 2 for Dallas and 2 for Denver. And the fastest way for me to do that is just to make an H323 gateway, which I'll do, and I'll call this one Denver General PSTN. Select the Denver device pool, and I'm done with this. And I'll simply copy. And this one will be used Denver emergency, and I'll change the IP address. And we'll say this will be 10.2.2.202. So that'll be the Denver emergency. Here I'm going to create a Dallas emergency and a Dallas general. So Dallas will be 10.3.3.101, and this will be Dallas General PSTN, the Dallas device pool, and then one more for Dallas emergency. And so we'll just call it 10.4.4.104. And then this one will be used for Dallas emergency. Okay, so I have 4 gateways, 2 locations. And what I want to do is create minimal route patterns. And that's what the local route group feature allows administrators. Notice under route hunt, route group, we have local route group names. Now, these are labels. This is the new feature, and I want to show you exactly how it works, but you're not creating route groups on this tab. You're creating labels, and that's all that this is. These labels are placed on the device pool, and you do not have to populate each device pool. Let me demonstrate. So I'm going to name these, I'm going to create 2 local route groups. I'm going to create one for general PSTN, and that's exactly what it's going to be used for. So I'll just say all PSTN calls except emergency. And add a second row. And then this one will be used for emergency calls. Okay, so by creating these local route group names, these labels, this is what I've accomplished. If I go to the device pool, I will see all of my device pools will now have those labels. So the Dallas device pool has general and emergency, just as these are exactly what I created. If I go look at the other device pool, Denver, the labels are there as well. So now at this point, we need to show you exactly how they're going to be used. And what we need to do is create real route groups that are going to contain physical gateways. So I will create a Denver route group for PSTN calls. If you're in Denver and you make a general outside call, you're going to use this gateway, the 10.1.1.101 gateway. If you are in Denver and you call emergency, you're going to use this gateway, 10.2.202. And then I'll do the same thing for Dallas. And then if you're in Dallas, you'll use the 10.3.3.101 for general emergency, or excuse me, general PSTN calls. And one more for Dallas emergency. And we'll use the 10.4.4.104 gateway. So I have 4 route groups. Each route group contains a physical gateway. And I'm going to create 2 route lists. And this one will be used for Dallas. And let's see. This one is going to be just general. PSTN calls. And here are the Unified Communications group. This is the server that it will be using. Now, the general PSTN route list, a route list does what? It contains route groups. Route groups physically contain gateways. So, and we attach that to a route pattern. So if you dial this pattern, you're going to go to this list, which contains a specific group, which contains exact gateways. And that's how it's always been. Here, though, this route list, the general PSTN, I'm going to add the local route group that I created, general PSTN. And what's significant about this route group is it does not contain any gateways. Remember, this is just the label. The general PSTN is just the label that I made under local route group names. It's this. And there's no gateway here. I'll create the second route list, which will be used for emergency. And I'm going to link the call manager group that it will register to. The route group that I'm going to link to this list is going to be the emergency calls, the local route group, not the route groups themselves that actually contain gateways. We're going to use these labels. Now, if we go look under Route Plan Report, we can see that, pardon me, we can see that there's nothing in there regarding route lists and route groups yet because I haven't created any route patterns. So the route patterns, will create two route patterns. One for general PSTN calls. We'll say they'll start with 9. So if you dial 9, 2 through 9, anything, keep it just very, very basic. If anyone in the company dials 9, 2 through 9, followed by any number, any amount of times, they're going to use the general PSTN route list. It says no authorization code will be used, and this will reset the route list. And I'll make another one for emergency. And set this to the emergency route list. Now that I've done that, I'll go to the route plan report. And here we can see if anyone in the company dials 911, their call will go to the emergency route list, which contains the label emergency calls. There's no gateway in that yet. And there won't be. There's no gateway or trunk attached. If they call 9 anything, any PSTN call, it's not going to be 911. If they call anything else, then that starts with 9, then they're going to match this route list, which again contains the label route group. Now how this actually works is we have to go to the device pools themselves. And if you're in Dallas and you dial 9, 2 through 9 anything, you're going to use the general PSTN route list, which will contain the general PSTN route group. And for Dallas, that means you use the Dallas PSTN group, which contains the 10.3 gateway. And then click reset or apply. If you're in Dallas and you call emergency, you're going to use the Dallas emergency route group, which physically contains the 10.4 gateway. If you're in Denver and you call an emergency number, then you will use the Denver emergency route group, which contains the 10.2 gateway. And if you are in Denver and you call a basic PSTN number, you're going to use the Denver PSTN route group. So that's where these labels come into effect. So one more time, if we look at the route plan and we see if you dial emergency, it depends where you're at. It depends where in the country you're located. or excuse me, where in the company you're located. If you're located in Denver, then you're going to use, it will go to your device pool. Say, okay, a Denver phone with the Denver device pool dialed 911. What does that mean? What does Denver's device pool have for this setting, this local route group? We go look, and Denver device pool has, this label contains that route group. We can go look at that route group, and that physical route group contains the 10.2 gateway. If you're in Dallas and you dial the same number, you're going to have a different experience because users in Dallas have a different device pool. Phones in Dallas will have this device pool associated with them. They'll match the same pattern, which will lead them to this local route group. But for Dallas users, it contains the Dallas emergency route group. And the Dallas emergency route group contains the 10.4 gateway. So it wouldn't matter if you had 10 sites or 20 locations. You would not need to create an additional route pattern. You would have one 911 route pattern for the entire company. And depending where the call was placed, it would go check that device pool, which is associated to that site's telephone. It would check that device pool and see which route group and gateway is used if you're calling emergency from this location. So it dramatically simplifies the amount of route patterns used for multiple sites and multiple types of numbers. So that was the local route group that's a new feature in version 10. Finally, the last feature that I want to talk about is going to be using the translation pattern, or allowing the translation pattern to use the originator's calling search space. And this is going to simplify your dial plan. It's going to allow one set of permissions to remain consistent throughout the duration of the call. Typically, when a call comes in, the gateway or trunk that receives the call needs to have permission to send it to a translation pattern. The translation pattern may change 10 digits down to 4, and then the translation pattern needs a second set of permissions to continue the call. With this new feature, we eliminate the need for that second set of permissions. So here's what I have. In this example, I have an internal user, Andre, who has 4002 as his directory number. Now, outside users are not going to be able to dial 4002. They'd have to dial his full 10-digit number, which in this case would be 303-555, 4002. And that is actually listed as his external number mask. Or should be listed as his external number mask. So this will be the number that outside users who want to reach Andre, they would dial this. So somewhere between that point, the outside, this call coming in and hitting our trunk, this number needs to be presented to Call Manager as 4 digits. Otherwise, the call will fail. How do I know that? By looking in the route plan report. The route plan report shows that the 10-digit number doesn't reach a phone. It's actually going to reach a translation pattern. And this pattern is what's going to take 10 digits and it will turn it into 4 digits. So if we want the call to succeed, we have to give the trunk permission to use this pattern. Notice this, it's locked with the translation pattern partition. So the trunk wants to use this, which will take anything in this pattern, and it will modify the called number, the destination number, to 4 digits. So it's basically going to turn 10 into 4. It's got a lock, so we would have to give the trunk permission to use that. So the trunk has a calling search space called trunk. This calling search space contains it'll have the translation patterns partition. So the trunk has this calling search space, and it can unlock anything in the route plan that has translation pattern as its partition. And again, there's only one item in the route plan report with that partition. So the gateway or trunk in this example has permission to use one thing: dial the translation pattern. The translation pattern takes the call, turns 10 into 4, and then it becomes the source of the call. And it needs permission to continue the call because the call is going to end up going to Andre, and Andre's phone or extension has this partition. So this extension is locked with that partition. So if we want the call to continue, the pattern will need permission to forward the call to this extension. So the translation pattern needs permission to use this. So we have to have a calling search space, a second one, and it must contain the phone partition. And I'm going to assign this calling search space to the translation pattern. So we have two sets of permissions, one on the gateway, which allows it to use this. That's the first portion of the call. Then the pattern, the translation pattern, needs permission to continue the call to the actual directory number. It needs permission. And now the call should succeed. One more time, I'm going to look at the route plan report and see that if 10 digits comes in, the trunk will receive it. The trunk has permission to use this. The translation pattern will take 10 digits, turn it into 4, and the translation pattern needs permission to call this device, and we gave it a calling search space so that it does have permission. Two sources, two calling search spaces. One for the trunk and then one for the pattern. So let's test the call. I'm going to be using an outside phone that so the call comes from the outside world. Now, in version 10, we can eliminate needing both sets, two separate sets of permissions. Here, I can go to the source of the call, the trunk, which has this calling search space, and I can give the trunk permission to use the translation pattern, and I can give the trunk permission to use the phone. 10 digits, we'll use this. The pattern itself will turn 10 into 4, and the trunk has permission to continue the call here. So one set of permissions will be used at the trunk. So the trunk has the trunk calling search space. In the translation pattern, we no longer have to give it a separate calling search space. We can remove that. The call will now fail It fails because the translation pattern does not have the ability to call the directory number because it's locked with the phone partition. If we want to use the gateway to do both, check this box, use Originator, in this case the gateway or the trunk, use the trunk's calling search space to access this and to continue the call. And now try the same call again, and the call succeeds. So with this feature, we can use the originator, the source of the calls, calling search space, and those permissions remain consistent throughout the call. So what we've looked at were 4 new features that are available in Unified Communications Manager version 10. That's going to do it for this presentation. I hope that you found it interesting and useful. Thanks for listening.